Sometimes a game will come along that is so pioneering, domineering, and industry steering that it creates a genre of its own. When Doom came out, it blew up. Thousands of Doom clones popped up overnight. Doom clones became a genre of their own, which would eventually become first-person shooters, a genre of its own. It started out by copying Doom's simple but fun design philosophy and building upon it. Companies rushed to have their own piece of the Doom pie, and many fortunes were made in this time. The Metroidvania genre is named after the Metroid and Castlevania series, who both have this kind of shared founding of this genre, of maps that slowly unfold as you get new powers. It's still popping out successful games like Hollow Knight. Souls-like is another super obvious recent example. These are the games that are like Dark Souls. The Dark Souls series has spawned a wave of imitators, many of which are decent or even good. Even in the modern day, we have the so-called boomer shooters that are trying to imitate how shooters used to be. Indie shooters recreating the level design and mechanics and style of shooter games from the 90s. Halo, for a time, dominated the entire FPS genre, and, to nobody's surprise, affected the games everybody else was making. This was the era of Halo killers. The term they chose to use was interesting. With Doom, everybody just wanted to copy it. They made tons of games that were almost reskins. They were clones. Saying something is like Dark Souls or Metroid is simply saying that it has some features in common. It's Souls-like. But with Halo, people wanted to kill it like it was their enemy, and it's telling what people thought about it at the time. It feels as though people just watched Halo gameplay and were told to copy it. Many of the Halo killers at the time almost feel like a parody of Halo and its mechanics. Halo was quite possibly the biggest revolution in FPS since Doom. Half-Life was huge, but Halo changed the fundamental mechanics with features such as 2-weapon limits, regenerating health, mixed vehicle and on-foot gameplay, melee and grenades being tied to their own key rather than being separate weapons. To see how different it was, just look at something like Unreal, the closest shooter to Halo before Halo. They really don't have that much in common. The retro shooter as we know it, the Doom clone and Quake clone, was already kinda dead by the time of Halo. Look at the biggest first-person shooters of 2000, the year before Halo. Console FPS like Time Splitters and Perfect Dark. Tactical FPS like Counter-Strike. id Software was fizzling out. Daikatana flopped. You can see how Halo came along and kicked everyone's ass at the time. You can see why some people hated it at the time. A studio seemed to come from the outside, not producing any FPS games since the days they were exclusive to Mac. Then appeared out of nowhere and took over the FPS genre with their radically different direction. It was like an intrusion. Halo was a bit of a sleeper hit, so it took a few months for people to realize how big it was. The term Halo killer has kind of come to describe the types of games that tried to ape Halo at the time, in part or in whole. The shooters that were noticeably influenced by it started to appear around 2003. For example, Chrome from 2003. Made by Poles was one such example of a game that seemed to have some degree of Halo influence. It somehow seems fitting that the first of the Halo killer genre was some Eurojank developed inside some shack in the middle of a potato farm. The one-word title that doesn't necessarily seem to be related to shooting or violence. AI companions that accompany you and have a lot of voice lines. A sexy female companion who looks to be straight out of a Britney Spears music video. And huge open levels with mixed on-foot and vehicle gameplay. The thing is, there is a lot of empty and unused space in these levels, and the vehicles don't feel very good. They kind of stick to the floor. You don't gather much airtime when you go for jumps, and you don't feel the suspension when you land like you do in Halo. They tried to implement some inventory mechanics like Deus Ex, but it doesn't really work. You can only hold 2 weapons at a time anyway. And it seems like they can't tell the difference between Halo and like a tactical shooter. You have low health, which regenerates slowly when you use health packs. You fight dudes with hit scan weapons. One of the reasons you never really fight humans in Halo is because fighting human enemies kinda sucks. They just use hit scan weapons that you can't dodge. It's harder to create cool and unique animations, behaviors, and character silhouettes. It's harder to create interesting weapons that are fun to fight against, or unique sound and audio lines. Basically, you sacrifice a ton of creative and design freedom when you could instead just be fighting demons or aliens. The movement also feels like a parody of Halo. Most other developers at the time just looked at Halo and thought, slow. At least these guys understood that momentum had something to do with it, but they didn't really understand it that well. It basically feels like you're ice skating. It takes forever to build up speed. It was developed by Techland, the same people who would make Dying Light. I'm surprised how many big developers started out making Halo killer slop. I gave up on this game pretty quickly because, well, yeah. The best thing about this game was the bearded dinosaur in the installation screen. I love this little fella like you wouldn't believe. Warhammer 40k Fire Warrior, also released in 2003. This one posed itself as the direct answer to Halo. You know this because it was a PlayStation exclusive. In its marketing, it proudly touted the tagline, "Who needs Halo?" Yeah, this one was quite poorly reviewed. I think, if anything, having this as a PlayStation exclusive highlighted the rift between the PS2 and the Xbox. Although, I'll be honest, the game was better than I thought it would be. Better than a lot of the games I played for this video. Don't get me wrong, it still isn't good. But at least it doesn't give the enemies all hit-scan weapons. You can dodge them, and they have unique personalities and unique character silhouettes. They are very stupid and weak though, dying easily and not showing any especially complex behavior. The weapons have slow projectiles, including yours. They are also very inaccurate, which becomes frustrating to play with. The game is extremely linear, being mostly set in hallways or trenches with no flanking routes. As much as Halo Combat Evolved reused level geometry, said level geometry was at least fun to fight in. It had verticality, it had branching paths and distinct cover and sight lines. This doesn't have that. One thing you'll notice about the movement in this is that you stick to the floor. In Halo you kind of slide or bounce against geometry. Gravity doesn't immediately pull you back to the ground. It seems like there are more collision calculations happening in Halo. In this, and a lot of these games I cover, gravity just kind of pulls you straight down. A lot of the movement in these shooters feels like they just took the simplistic style of movement from classic PC shooters and just slowed that down, rather than try to understand or recreate the finely tuned momentum-based movement of Halo, rather than consider why it's slower beyond just the fact that it's a console game. The melee weapon is a separate weapon in this game, and like most games of that category, it's kind of useless. This is how classic shooters handled melee weapons. On-demand powerful melee that's directly tied to a button incentivizes up-close engagements in Halo. It has Halo Combat Evolved's shield system basically verbatim, regenerating shield with health packs. But this game doesn't have the whole damage type system, and it didn't seem like the enemies had shields, certainly not for the first few levels, so the shield system doesn't really add any depth to the gameplay. They don't understand the point of the 2-weapon limit. There's no reason to pick up a bunch of the weapons that are found on the ground. They're usually a downgrade, and they almost always have less ammo. There isn't much reason to scavenge and swap out weapons, so you never really experiment at all. And you have to carry a tower weapon with you the whole time. For a bunch of levels, there isn't even anything to swap it out with. In cases like this, the 2-weapon limit absolutely limits creativity and diversity of the experiences you can have. The game should be actively pushing you to pick up new weapons and change your loadout. This one also has the Halo switcheroo halfway through the game, where you fight a brand new enemy type. You start fighting Chaos instead of the Space Marines like you do at the start. The issue is that they're basically the same enemies with just more health. When the Flood were revealed, they were actually a brand new enemy type that fought completely differently. They didn't use tactics and have shields. They swarmed you and surrounded you with sheer numbers. I mean, I just played the game until I got a Boltor and fought a Space Marine. Then I just kind of gave up. Overall, probably not worth playing, but you can get a lot worse than this. And things are going to get a lot worse in this video. Chaser, developed by Cauldron and published by Joe Wood, is another Halo clone. Cauldron would do a few of these sci-fi Halo clone FPS, and they were rarely very good. In fact, this one is hilariously bad. For the first level, there is one weapon, where you fight one enemy. It's just a random hit scan gun, and the enemies are just random dudes. And you need to peek around corners, because they'll take you out really quickly. Some of the designs go kinda hard, but this game is just so poorly made. The level design is nonsensical, the enemies are horrifically dumb, the guns have no impact and are really poorly tuned. It would be unfair to compare this game to the Jeff the Killer Cube game, let alone Halo. I wanted to try Gene Troopers by these guys as well, but apparently has some Russian DRM that bricks your computer if you don't install it correctly. And I know it might be hard to believe, but I don't want to play Gene Troopers bad enough that I'd risk destroying my PC. It's also kind of hilarious that these guys would end up becoming Bohemia, who would make the Armor series. Killzone was released in 2004. Fire Warrior didn't work, so Sony needed another exclusive sci-fi shooter to go up against Halo. This one was, again, billed as a Halo killer. It was not, by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it was up against Halo 2. I mean, that was the Coughing Baby versus Interstellar Nuclear Mac Cannon battle of 2004. We talk about Eurojank a lot, but I think that only applies to anything from Germany eastward. Western Europe produces the exact opposite of Eurojank. Extremely polished games with absolutely no soul or substance. Like Ubisoft is French, for example. Another studio that perfectly encompasses this is Guerrilla Games, the makers of Killzone, and the Horizon series, so there you go. Killzone 1 was basically a mobile shooter, before that was even a thing. It has some of the dumbest AI I've ever seen. Extremely scripted and linear, all hit scan human enemies. I mean, you've got a damn sci-fi game. You could do anything and you choose the most boring enemies to fight. The 3-weapon limit could be cool, but there's just little reason to pick up a lot of the weapons, given they're kind of redundant. Ooh, which basically identical assault rifle do I use? In Halo, the counterpart weapons at least had some unique function, a different utility, different ammo system. The game also sacrifices a lot for the visuals. The animations are really distracting and obstructive. To be fair, some of the visuals are pretty good. I kind of loved the imposing brutalist atmosphere. People criticized it at the time because every game looked dark and gritty, but in retrospect, I think there was some really good art here. Killzone 2 and 3 moved more towards the COD clone formula. The game improved, but I don't think it ever achieved greatness. They had completely free online multiplayer for the sequels, which is the memory I think most people probably have of this series. Star Wars Republic Commando was released in 2005. It wasn't billed as a Halo killer, but it was clearly very Halo influenced. It was developed by LucasArts and directed by Tim Longo. It was like the Star Wars answer to Halo. And it was good, because they didn't just try to clone Halo. They took Halo style mechanics, but made their own thing. They didn't try to go up against it. Going up against Halo at the time would be like one of those old people spending 14 hours a day at the casino, slumped over, thinking they're somehow going to win. Every possible card is stacked against you. It was centered around squad mechanics, like an arcadey, streamlined version of tactical shooters like SWAT. If you don't worry about squad placement, you get ganked quickly, and whenever you die, $10 is subtracted from your bank account and sent straight to George Lucas. They have Halo-like melee, but with no lunge. I noticed basically none of these games implemented a melee lunge. The melee rarely felt as strong as in Halo, which sucks because the powerful melee can let you get up close to enemy engagements. The good thing about this game is the variety of enemies. Some rush you, some flank you. These little bugs just fly right up to you and melee you. Some stay in a galaxy far, far away. And naturally, being Star Wars, the enemies have very unique silhouettes and designs. The game did not use Halo's 2-weapon limit. Honestly, I actually think this is the kind of game that a 2-weapon limit could work in. If you had a wide range of weapons that you could scavenge off the floor and were made to decide which ones you pick up for your own use and which ones you make your team equip, that would be interesting. Republic Commando was good because they came up with their own gameplay loop. They were inspired by Halo, but didn't directly try to ape it. And from a good game to, again, a terrible one, Area 51. It came out in 2005, and yes, it was hilariously bad. It feels like one of those basic Unity asset flip games. Actually, no, FPS creator. They had David Duchovny from the X-Files and Marilyn Manson voice act in it. It would have been better if they spent that money on more game designers. You trudge through basic corridors fighting generic zombie dudes. The movement's literally just like Half-Life movement that's very drastically slowed down. You even have the faster diagonal movement speed. I tried to play the game until I found a new enemy type. I got bored before I found anything besides zombies. There are some generic army dudes apparently that you fight later on for the rest of the game, but you'd think that given it's a game about Area 51, with an alien on the cover, there'd be more aliens. but you barely fight them. It'd be more fun to fight aliens. You spend the majority of this game fighting generic enemies. Apparently this game was distributed for free by the US Armed Forces in what I can only assume was an act of psychological warfare. Maybe it was a part of MK Ultra. They didn't understand basic game design, let alone Halo. Pariah was also released in 2005 by Digital Extremes, the Warframe guys. This one is about as generic as can be. The movement and physics feel like Morrowind movement sped up to be a shooter. Is this what people thought Halo felt like? Studios at the time were still clearly struggling to figure out what Halo was. It feels like they only listened to the critics of Halo. Oh, it's a cover shooter. Oh, it's slow. These games were Halo made by people who hate Halo. They made the guns super inaccurate and lacking any impact. This one was just kind of boring. Why do they always have these brain-dead human enemies? Did they not see how the enemies in Halo move? Every enemy, they show off a unique character. They try out a huge range of tactics. Sometimes they'll push you up close for a melee, which you can dodge because enemy melees carry their momentum. The enemies in this game barely seem to want to move at all. This one tried something new with the health system, which could be cool if the game didn't make you fall asleep after 30 minutes. I will concede that I like the destruction in this game. It's nothing huge and doesn't really affect gameplay, but it is visually satisfying to see these structures crumble like this. And some of the environment art is actually decent as well. Sony tried yet again to get an exclusive alien fighting FPS of their very own with Resistance: Fall of Man. This is actually a good game though, because like Republic Commando, it was influenced by Halo while not directly trying to ape it. It did certainly have that distinct 7th gen bloom though. Overall, it did its own thing. It has some of the tropes like aliens invading Earth and AI companions that fight alongside you. It has an interesting health system, kind of like Pariah actually, except this time it's actually in a good game. So just like Halo, when you're not getting shot at, your health will regenerate, but in this game it will only be within this chunk. The only way to get those chunks of health back is through health packs. It has some interesting weapons with unique functionalities that aren't just stolen from Halo, like the alien rifle that shoots a tag that subsequent bullets will arc towards. You can also dodge the enemy projectiles, given they aren't hit scan. The movement is good. It's kinda like that early 2000s Halo style movement. No sprint, but it isn't painfully slow or janky. However, your jump is kind of small and not super useful. In fact, I don't feel like there was much verticality in this game. A lot of the battlefields are kind of flat. It isn't bad, but I feel that more verticality would have benefited the game a lot. You get the Halo instant access grenades in Melee. The Melee isn't terrible, but again, it feels like it lacks utility in a lot of situations. The grenades are really cool. There are a ton of different types. I still haven't seen a game match Halo's grenades though. The fact that they cause a chain reaction, blowing up all the other grenades, makes you feel smart. Like you used your options well, like you made a good purchase, like you just did something that felt right, like you just subscribed to Shredder Nerd. I haven't seen any other game recreate this kind of controlled chaos that Halo has. There is no 2-weapon limit, so we don't get to see the potential benefits or shortcomings of it in this. You're a World War II army dude who can carry a whole arsenal. I guess you just keep them keistered like a prison shank. The enemy AI are decent, perhaps not as many distinct behaviors as Halo enemies, but they show some degree of tactical awareness. No switcheroo halfway through though. You fight the same dudes for most of the game. Of course they introduce new enemy types, but nothing that transforms the fight. There are vehicle sections as well. What you'll typically notice is that a lot of the vehicle sections in many FPS games are very linear. They force you into a vehicle which only appears on this one level at the very beginning of the level, and it's often impractical or even impossible to beat certain encounters without the vehicle. The vehicles aren't dynamic. You don't fight against enemies with the same vehicles. You can't just decide to steal an enemy vehicle unless it's scripted. To quote Yahtzee from Zero Punctuation,
It is quite organic with big open levels that are all like, just going to leave this vehicle here, maybe using it to drive around the level would be frickin' sweet, but if that's not your bag, you know what they say about rocks, they're nature's bouncy castle.
Other games seem to struggle with this. Resistance certainly isn't the game to topple Halo. It was just a great little campaign with a ton of potential for future improvements. Halo 3, of course, released in 2007, and it was the biggest Halo game. It was quite possibly the best as well. This is probably Halo's peak. It really did take over shooters as a whole. Call of Duty 4 released in the same year, and this is when Call of Duty really came into its own. Infinity Ward planned their own Halo killer at the same time. That's actually what they called it internally, it was their Halo killer game. That's how overpowering Halo was at the time. They did actually decide to cancel it though, and moved those resources onto Call of Duty 4, which was, all in all, far more effective in the fight against Halo than any other game. Its major innovation was the loadout building, leveling, and weapon unlocking that was super addictive. It built upon what was established from Halo 3's ranking system, and that is that people love grinding XP. Time Shift was somewhat Halo influenced. It had the armored guy on the front cover with a sci-fi setting, but it also seemed to have somewhat of an identity crisis. It was just as, if not more so, Fear influenced. Halo and Fear are both good games, but they are different, and don't really work together. This is just another tactical game where you fight hit-scan dudes. I think the movement was the worst part of this game. On subsequent jumps it would slow you down. It really makes you feel very immobile. The time shift abilities are kinda cool, but overall the game is just yeah. Crysis also released in the same year. It kinda went up against Halo as well. The sci-fi setting where you play as a superpowered armor dude. This one was set in the distant future year of 2020. The most unrealistic part of it was obviously the fact that people are allowed to leave their house. Hey, at least the main character wears a mask. It had wide open levels. It had the alien invasion of Earth. It had mixed vehicle and on-foot gameplay. Not to mention, it also does the switcheroo halfway through where you fight brand new enemies. Crysis was good because it also had a shared lineage in Far Cry. It was basically Halo-flavored Far Cry. And playing it reminds me that Far Cry could legitimately be a 10 out of 10 game. It isn't. Nor is Crysis. But it's a formula that they've absolutely squandered and could do so many awesome things with. As it turns out, giving the player a lot of freedom is fun when there's an actual challenge to be overcame. A lot of the newer Far Cry games just give you so many overpowered tools. You are a lot weaker in Crysis than in Halo. It was more like a tactical stealth shooter. I kinda like how weak you are in this. Modern Far Cry gives you a million tools for trivial outposts. I like actually having to make some tactical decisions. The vehicle gameplay is fun in Crysis as well. This is one game that actually did the vehicles well, like in Halo. They're strewn about the map naturally. You can steal them from enemies and use them yourself. They're like a natural part of the world. Crysis was also lauded in its day as the greatest graphical powerhouse yet. The best looking game on the market. But honestly, I think Halo 3 looks better. Going back, I feel like Halo 3's art direction and visual identity is still really strong to this day. The lighting still holds up incredibly well. I mean, people played it back then in sub HD at 30 FPS, so I think people didn't realize it. But I think Halo 3 has aged better. It's built on more solid principles. Of course you could cherry pick things like facial models, but overall, Halo 3 holds up better. Haze. This is the one we were waiting for. It was yet another Sony exclusive touted as the final decisive Halo killer. This one is infamous for the fact that, well, it did not kill Halo. Instead, it killed Free Radical, the studio developing it. This is unfortunate because these guys made Time Splitters, one of the more successful non-Halo shooters of this era in gaming. It, yet again, has that distinctive bloom. This time turned up to 1 million, you can basically get the same experience as this game by rubbing Vaseline in your eyes and walking outside. This game is honestly the quintessential Halo killer. It sums up this whole genre of game. Talented devs failing to understand Halo. Publishers pushing developers to make something they have no interest in. Who are the baddies in this? Dudes with guns. It has the switcheroo halfway through. You fight more dudes with guns. Stupid dudes as well. Which is interesting considering they touted how advanced the AI would be, that they'd use some new AI system. Perhaps the uninteresting level design doesn't actually allow the AI to do anything interesting. In fact, you go from fighting the rebels alongside your space marine dudes to fighting for the rebels. Both factions fight very similarly. Low time to kill, a lot of redundant AR style hit scan weapons. There are some vehicle levels as well. I did some basic QA as soon as I got the buggy. I tried to drive up a hill to test the physics and I got stuck straight away. I think that illustrates better than any words I could use precisely how the vehicle physics are in this game. I restarted and went through this level and I was very surprised. Is this a linear canyon that I just drive down in a straight line where the vehicle serves no purpose other than crossing ground? Wow, it really is just like every other game. Besides, of course, the game it was trying to compete against, Halo. The Space Marine dudes are addicted to something called nectar. They're basically forced to consume. They have this whole honey related thing going with the yellow and black and the hive shapes. Basically, they have to suck from honey under threat of a gun blast. When you're a Space Marine, you have the ability to zoom on every weapon, and you have this honey stuff that gives you health and a speed boost. When you join the Rebels, you lose that stuff and you start using ADS. It doesn't really change the gameplay much here, and yeah, in this one, the Space Marines are the bad guys. They are portrayed as being like frat bro douchebags, the dude bro stereotype that was often associated with Halo and Call of Duty players at the time. And it's trying to do a commentary on Halo. Halo was the dude bro game, where you're accompanied by wisecracking Marines. Plus, you fight for an imperialistic military force in Haze. It seems like a commentary on the UNSC, which is also an imperialistic dictatorship in Halo. Some people criticized Halo as being militaristic propaganda where the humans are uncritically portrayed as heroes against some foreign religion. And it seems like Haze wanted to jab at Halo by portraying the organization you fight for and your Space Marine pals as douchebags and bad guys. Here's the thing though, that critique landed with a thud because people like Halo's Marines. Their wisecracking was entertaining, it was relatable and uplifting, it was endearing, it made them feel human. And it was only clowns like Movie Blob who were criticizing Halo for being imperialist propaganda, which is strange considering the kind of sacrifices he would make to be on a starship right now. If you want stories on the dark side of the UNSC, there's plenty of that in the Halo novels already. Basically, all of your actions in the games are justified. And it doesn't just demonize some foreign unknown enemy, it goes in depth on the Covenant, and it's made pretty clear in the story that their beliefs are evil and unjustifiable. It's like they went in wanting to think that Halo was just a dumb generic shooter for dude bros and tried to parody it. They missed the whole point, and their game fell flat on its face. And I think just given the fact that most people didn't even pick up on this, shows that it was a pretty weak jab. The Conduit was also released in 2008, and it's a Wii shooter, so it's already crippled from the starting line. Even Nintendo had to have their own Halo killer at some point, where you fight aliens. For what it is though, it's actually quite good. I think that should be enough of an award in and of itself, being a Wii shooter and not completely sucking. It's not super in-depth, but it has some cool weapon ideas. It has a really interesting and underutilized setting for video games, being based around these government conspiracy theories, particularly of the kind of national treasure variety, decoding the hidden symbolism of the US government, stealing the Declaration of Independence. This is an awesome setting. I mean, most Americans don't even know that the founding fathers were all Freemasons. Of course, it's kind of slow moving. It's not like the enemies are brilliant tactical minds, but I'm just surprised how competent it is. I played the Android version, and it does kinda play itself. It is a bit dumbed down, but it seems to be similar. The Turok series was rebooted in 2008 with a very much of its time shooter. It was directed by Josh Holmes, and I believe this was his first outing making an FPS game. I remember this one looking good and being quite decent back in 2008. Obviously, it does not look good today. In terms of gameplay, it's fine, I guess. One thing I will give it credit for, it builds up the T-Rex enemy well throughout the course of the game. And I like that it has optional stealth and doesn't punish you for going loud. Its handling of 2 weapon limits and dual wielding is decent. There is a bit of a lack of cool or outside the box weapons, but it's fine. It ticks the boxes. I think the most disappointing thing about this game is the fact that you spend so much of it fighting hit-scan human dudes, or near hit-scan. See, when I talk about hit-scan all throughout this video, I just mean fast-firing kinetic human weapons. where the bullet basically travels to you instantly. Now, this is a game about fighting dinosaurs. I guess it is kinda hard to do that and make it interesting, considering they all have to be melee enemies. I think the worst aspect of this was that Turok 2008 was a gritty, realistic sci-fi reboot of a previously very fantastical game that features a lot of mysticism. I think that naturally limits your options. They had to have the whole Space Marine angle with you getting shot down and crash landing on some bizarre planet. Because, as we know, if you want to copy Halo's success, you just take the superficial aspects of it without understanding the point of it. The movement in this one wasn't horrendous. It was still from that time when not every single FPS game had to have sprinting. I don't think Turok 2008 was bad, but it absolutely attempted to chase trends. I think to its detriment. Nova was another mobile shooter. This one released in 2010. It was in the early explosion of mobile gaming, the gold rush. And an easy strategy was just to rip off what actual proper games were doing. In this case, Halo. Nova is pretty much a straight rip of Halo. Some of the designs are so ridiculously close to Halo. You play as Monster Chef in copyright infringement. Just within the intro you see the Warthog, the Magnum and Cortana. I'm also surprised just how huge this game was. How many fans it has. Microsoft literally could have released a mobile Halo game instead of Halo 4 and it probably would have been more successful. And I mean a first-person shooter, not Spartan Assault. In terms of how it played, well, it's a mobile shooter. Linear campaign, very strongly inspired by Halo. I appreciate that they tried to break up the gameplay with different encounters, turrets, hacking sections, because you can't rely on gameplay alone in a mobile shooter. The enemies don't show incredibly sophisticated behavior. Well, they can't, of course. It's a mobile game. The mechanics, level design and movement are rather simple, but given what they had, they did well. The Halo killers started to slow down after 2010. The strategy was clearly not working, and Halo itself was losing steam. Call of Duty was pulling ahead after the release of Reach. It was hitting its stride with its addictive formula. Josh Holmes, from Turok fame, joined a new company and finally got to make a successful Halo killer. Halo 4. It was made by 343 Industries. From being copied relentlessly, having all of its superficial features ripped off by the rest of the industry, to copying the superficial aspects of the new popular shooter game, Call of Duty. Halo died an unnatural death. They probably could have just pumped out the exact same games over and over, and people would have still bought it. They could have innovated and it might have worked. Instead, they just nabbed features from other popular games at the time. Tim Longo of Republic Commando fame also went to 343, helping create Halo 5's squad system, inspired by Republic Commando. And it was absolutely terrible. It was the worst Halo campaign. It doesn't capture any of the interesting aspects of Republic Commando, and it was half-baked. No, quarter-baked. Actually, no, it wasn't even the batter. It was unmixed eggs and flour in a bowl. I think, given how flat Republic Commando was in its geometry, it's a lot harder to translate that to very vertical environments like you'd find in Halo. You'd have to place jump hints absolutely everywhere, and somehow beg the AI to actually use those hints. 343's decade-long experiment with Halo is well documented now. What frustrates me most about it as a Halo fan is that there is no other game that fills the void. No other game gives you the experience you can get out of Halo. That's why I still play the old Halos. I honestly wish somebody came along and supplanted Halo, nailed the formula and built upon it, and far outstripped any other Halo game. I don't want every game to be Halo 3. I want every game to be better than Halo 3. It's just none of them have been. Back in the day, people complained about how oversaturated the market was by Halo.
I'm Haloed out after Halo 3. Then you can imagine what happened when I played ODST. I wasn't exactly foaming at the mouth for Halo Reach to release.
Some people felt that Halo was like the most basic standard shooter.
Halo 3 is by no means bad. What it is average, boilerplate, run-of-the-mill. A competent shooter, its only remarkable feature being the degree to which it stuck up its own arse. Everything it does has been done before and better.
I think personally this could not be further from the truth. The main Halo games had about a 3-year gap between each of them, and literally no game has matched it in terms of feeling, in terms of gameplay, in terms of what it achieves. The people who complained about Halo back then and hated on it remind me a lot of the Redditors who complain about Fortnite nowadays. Now, Fortnite is a good game. It took over the industry because it was the best battle royale on the market. People shit on it to be contrarian. That's the same thing that happened to Halo. I think there are some games that nailed some aspects of Halo though. For example, Battlefield, which kind of developed as a series alongside Halo. Both of their developments were parallel. Now I feel that Battlefield actually did manage to create the combined on-foot and vehicle gameplay that Halo had. The dynamic elements, the creativity. Borderlands is another game, and I think it got the shield system right. It actually expands upon it. There are different health bar types with elemental strengths and weaknesses. The damage types even react differently in gameplay. An armored enemy is different from a shielded enemy. The armored one won't regenerate, and that is one of the most interesting aspects of the game. More games should do this and emphasize this if similar features do exist. Even Doom Eternal had plasma weapons do more damage to shields. So why didn't all these devs get Halo? Maybe Halo's just hard to make. I mean, Bungie were geniuses. One of the lead programmers, Chris Butcher, completed a computer science degree at 15, not high school, a bachelor's degree at university. Lead designer Jamie Griesmer was a philosophy student who chose to go into game design instead of astrophysics as he was planning to. The developers who made these Halo clones ultimately didn't understand why these design decisions were the way they were. The regenerating shield wasn't just invented to make people hide behind rocks. It wasn't meant to make the game easier for console players. It made it so that players weren't tied to how the designer wanted them to play, and it actually had unique gameplay effects. The shields were a different material to flesh, so plasma weapons did more shield damage and could stun. In multiplayer, you could stun Spartans using plasma weapons. It was extra utility. The elites had shields. They were basically your equivalent on the battlefield. It was useful to pick up a plasma weapon because you could do more shield damage. The 2-weapon limit also had a variety of gameplay effects. It gave the level designers more freedom, as they don't have to account for players to be able to use any weapon at any given time, and they could basically control what weapons the players have access to at any given moment. In Doom, every level had to be playtested starting with just a pistol. 2-weapon limits gave the sandbox designers more freedom as well for the same reason. If the weapon isn't being carried all the time, you can make it way more powerful. The rocket launcher in old games like Quake was more like a micro missile, taking just a chunk out of a demon's health. The Halo rocket launcher was a mini nuke by comparison, because the designers didn't have to account for players having it at all times. 2-weapon limits also push the player to interact more with the environment, go around the battlefield searching for upgrades to your current arsenal. But wait, there's more. It also adds a tactical layer to combat because whenever you kill an enemy, it isn't just getting you closer to your objective, it's also dropping a weapon that could give you a tactical advantage. It also pushes you to experiment in Halo because having 2 weapons, you'll inevitably run out of ammo and have to pick up something new. And basically, there are literally a million reasons that 2-weapon limits are good, and these games rarely capitalize on any of them. A lot of these games barely even give you a reason to switch out your weapons. Some wouldn't even let you. The on-demand melee in grenades are obvious. In older FPS, they were relegated to separate weapons. They were weak and rarely used, often pointless. Giving a strong melee is super obvious because being up close to enemies is more fun. You do more dodging, which shows more competence, which is more fun for most people. None of the Halo killers I played had any melee lunge, and some of them was really hard to even hit your enemies. Many of them just made the melee useless because I guess, well, duh, it's a shooter game. But then you're just occupying a button with a pointless ability. The grenades become a constant part of gameplay in Halo. Rather than a side consideration like older shooters, they are essential to how you play the game, and having them on demand at the press of a button actually gets you to use them. Plus, they actually do something cool. They cause chain reactions and can majorly affect the battlefield. Why do other games rarely do this? The movement often sucks as well. PC gamers decried the advent of Halo and how it slowed down FPS, but the Halo killers did not have Halo's movement. In Halo, momentum was important. How you react to geometry was important. Super bouncing became a thing because of how player bipeds would interact with level geometry. You could actually use the level itself to help you get around quicker. Tribes, of course, did this. to a much greater extent. But somehow most Halo killers did not pick this up. You do not carry momentum at all. You have no moon jump, you just stick to the floor. And the vehicles. Crysis did alright with the vehicles, but most of the games just had these linear canyons. Even games like Half-Life designed vehicles as a one-time gimmick in very linear levels that would be discarded at the end of the level. It's not that Halo never had linear vehicle moments, but it also had a lot of freeform, large vehicle battles, vehicle arenas, and they make up just a regular part of gameplay. There are often more levels with vehicles than levels without in Halo games. In short, the vehicles in Halo are not a gimmick. In the Halo killers, they are. The final gameplay pillar that these Halo killers royally fuck up is the AI. Seriously, for a sci-fi game, you can do way better than the same enemies you fight in a COD campaign, and give some flanking routes for the AI. I guess it's a whole other ballpark to just say, program better AI. As if that isn't very difficult to do and doesn't require a lot of resources. And I guess that's where we go back to the original point. Bungie were the best in the industry. They could program this smart AI that are really fun to fight. They were the best at what they do, and that's just hard to recreate. Now, for the sake of this video, I wanted to do a thought experiment. How might an indie dev recreate the magic of Halo? I was thinking in the vein of those retro boomer shooters, but instead of Doom nostalgia, it's Halo Combat Evolved nostalgia, and has a similar gameplay loop to that. This is just a thought experiment. I'm not working on anything like this, by the way, although it would be cool to one day. Plus, it seems like an obvious business move. There are millions of Halo fans whose thirst for Cortana feet is going unquenched, considering the last 10 years of Halo have just sucked. Ultimately, the point of this is to consider what is essential to Halo's gameplay that literally every other studio missed. For this experiment, I asked designer Jamie Griesmer on Twitter, and he gave me this answer about not repeating the same magic trick twice. And I get what he means. How do you recreate Halo? Well, you can't. He also felt that he exhausted Halo creatively by the time Halo 3 was done, so there's no new territory to cover, at least in his eyes. He also said don't make the sniper rifle fire too fast. Since this is just a thought experiment, I'll present how I'd do it on an indie budget. My primary focus would be the enemies. It wouldn't be enough to just have enemies that charge towards you. They have to be able to flank, take cover, go berserk, search, hold position, push, create fronts, retreat. Basically just look at how Halo's objective system works. Halo used behavior trees to achieve its goals. There are other systems that can produce sophisticated behavior like A-star or A*, however you're meant to say it, and which was used in Fear. To be honest, I think this is just a template for making FPS better as a whole. I'm sick of games that have brain-dead enemies, or if they do have smart enemies, the level design doesn't let them do intelligent things. I'd also make sure the weapons are interesting, not just hit-scan rifles. Things like alt fire and extra shield damage, different ammo and reloading mechanisms, projectiles bouncing. Basically make them fun. Being functional isn't enough, though it is necessary. They need to have utility, and a variety of utility besides just it does damage. Like stunning enemies, for example. As well as that, I would make the vehicles actually a useful part of regular gameplay, an option that appears often, rather than just a gimmick you're forced to use once. Now, a lot of the games I talked about in this video just borrow the superficial aspects of the setting of Halo. But if you really wanted to recreate Halo, I honestly don't even think it needs to be sci-fi. It basically just needs some kind of crash landing on an ancient world of wonder and mystery. I also want to ask you guys, the audience, if you had to boil down Halo to its most simplistic form while still retaining the magic, how would it look? What do you think is most important to the experience of Halo? I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and goodbye. For this video, I would like to thank my patrons Lazy the Crazy, Glorious Bees, Maritime Steak 85, Delirious Fool, Top Keck Red, and Adam Safranco.